Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear us all right? Yes. Cool.
This is cozy, isn't it?
Yes, this is very cozy. This is the first for us doing a session in the big show stage, but nonetheless, we're here to talk about insights for ArcGIS. And this is the room for that. If you're here for that, great. We have an hour with you, and we have a lot of material. So we're going to try to get through a lot of this material. It is definitely at the introductory to just below that stage. We also have the island, the Insights stations out at the Expo Center, where you can learn a lot more as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Art Haddad. I'm the guy that's running the Insights program right now, as well as my colleague.
Well, it was your idea as well, so it's not just that you run it.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So I'm the lead product engineer on it. I make sure it happens.
Yeah, there you go. So together we lead the efforts around Insights. So with that, today's agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to give you a level of introduction to Insights, go over some of the details. We're going to get into using Insights with analysis, where Linda and I are actually going to switch it up a little bit. Although she generally does the presentation style demos, I am going to do the demos for you today. So it'll be interesting, hopefully fun too. And then of course we're going to talk a little bit about the roadmap and the way we're thinking about going forward with Insights. And if we have any time, hopefully have some Q&A time as well.
And you're welcome to ask questions as we go, but you'll have to wave frantically because there's a lot of lights in our faces, so I can't see you very well.
Definitely. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. When we first started Insights, we wanted to, what we call empty our cups. We wanted to start from scratch. We wanted to listen, learn, and observe. And in doing so, we spent a lot of time talking with a lot of different users. We went around to different industries, understanding all the different workflows across multiple industries. And what we came up with was a process in which we can take advantage of the power of GIS, hopefully by removing a lot of the technological complexity, enabling you to discover the power of what we're calling the exploratory spatial data analysis. It not only lets you visualize information, and quite clearly the visualization is truly a representation of the results of your analytic operations, and that's an important fact that you'll discover as we get into this a little bit more. But we also wanted to combine the concepts of spatial and tabular analysis in one place, with a heavy emphasis on spatial analysis. So we, in fact, work with not only spatial data, but non-spatial data. And we allow you to bring in those non-spatial tables and views directly and begin working with them before beginning the process of geo-enablement. We help understand the concepts of the questions that you're asking through an iterative approach. A question may lead to an answer, may lead to many more questions, and that iterative process is built into Insights. And everything that you see in these cards become linked, and everything becomes interactive, and everything becomes visual. It's also a different way of experiencing analysis. There we go. Okay, yeah, we're fine. Sorry, my computer had a little hiccup. It's also a different way of working with analysis in that you don't see a lot of menus and toolbars and a lot of dialogues that you have to fill out before anything. And it's not very tool-centric. It's very much workflow-centric, such that I begin working with the data itself, which is a little bit different. We'll get into more of those details in just a little bit. But more importantly, because of the interactive and exploratory nature of an analytic study itself, we also enable you to document the work as you go. Not only document the specific results that you're looking at, but also the entire workflow itself becomes a model from which records all of your actions, becomes repeatable, and of course you can share. So with that, what we wanted to do is introduce the concept of an analytic project to ArcGIS, and that comes in the form of what we call workbooks. These workbooks are true items within Portal, from which you can organize your work across multiple pages. And each page contains those results that we had talked about in the form of a card. Now, a card is more than just a visual. It enables you to further work and refine the result into additional data into additional analysis results, and also visualize the representation of that results in a number of different ways. Obviously, a map is very important, but maybe I can get a different perspective by changing that map to a pivot table, or changing it to a bar chart, or even a tree map or a bubble chart. It's just a different way of representing those results. And that's why these cards are a little bit more than just a visualization. So, the first part of any analytics study is data. Everyone understands that data is very, very important. And what we try to do with Insights, as I just mentioned, is work with both spatial and tabular data the same way. Obviously, tabular data you can't put on a map until there's some form of geo-enablement happening, but that doesn't mean I can't begin my analysis against that data independent of a geo-dimension. I can just start working and creating bar charts and scatter plots, and I can create summary tables, or also known as pivot tables. But also, connecting to that data is kind of important. Obviously, connecting to any ArcGIS content is what it is. We can work with it, not a problem at all. Whether it's a geodatabase, a feature layer, hosted, a reference layer from ArcGIS Online or from another portal into portal, but anything you bring into ArcGIS as well, CSV, GeoJSON, KML, etc. We've added the ability to work directly with Excel workbooks, XLSX files, directly into Insights as a convenience. And we'll continue to evolve that over time. But also the ability to work not only with all the ArcGIS content and Excel workbooks, but also native data sources, such as SQL Server, SAP HANA, and Teradata. So we work with all of this data and we bring all that in into a workbook in the form of what we call data sets. These data sets, when we bring them in, we actually interrogate the metadata of each of those data sources. And we identify the different roles a field might be able to play. You can think of this as dimensional modeling or creating a semantic model out of the data, essentially identifying a role that a field is assigned to, again, dimensions and measures. But we take it a step further and we identify geodimensions as well as temporal dimensions, space and time, as well as categorical and quantitative strings and numbers. But if you think about that, you can only do so much by interrogating the metadata, and sometimes you might get it wrong. As an example, zip codes. We bring those in as numbers. Well, they should be a string. I want to be able to group by zip codes or organize by zip codes. So if in fact it's brought in as a certain type, you can easily change it, and we'll be able to show some of this in a little bit. One of the key things that we emphasize is Insights is a modern browser application, which means drag and drop friendly, 3 clicks or less for most everything that you do, touch friendly, and highly interactive. By defining defaults for every field and a role assigned to each, we can intelligently define a set of defaults associated with each of those fields. So when we bring in a data set, we know it's of type spatial, we know it's a point, polygon, or a line, we can easily create a map card for you dynamically. If I have a point layer and a polygon layer, and I simply want to drag the point layer onto the polygon, 2 different cards, well, I have more options now because I know the types are point, the other type is polygon. Because it's GIS, we can add another layer to our map. But maybe what we want to do is filter the map to that extent of that layer that's coming in. Or maybe we even want to perform a spatial aggregation. So a simple drag and drop operation onto a specific drop zone enables all of those things. But we even take it a step further, because sometimes you really do know what you want to do, and you just want to go right to the tool. So on the map card, there's this thing called an action button. And if you click that action button, you can go straight to the tool of choice and perform the operation. You don't have to do the drag and drop or work with the different fields. Just execute and go. But sometimes you don't quite understand what to do in a GIS application. Maybe you're new to GIS, or maybe you don't quite know how to solve a specific problem. So we've added a new capability in here. If you notice on the analytics action panel there, it's not just spatial tools, but find answers. And if you look at the find answers tab, we begin with the question. When you begin an analytic study, you generally start with a question, or you don't know what the question is and you're exploring. In this case, a type of question might be, how is my data distributed? How is it related? If I click on one of these, it'll give me all the options available to me that'll help me answer the question. In this case, how is it distributed? How is it distributed gives me spatial aggregation. Maybe I want to calculate the density of a surface. Maybe it's a classification. Yes, classifying a map is a form of analysis. But also, what about just a histogram? Nothing wrong with a good old histogram, understanding the highs and lows of my data, adjusting the bins as I need. All of that is now possible, so it's a guided set of workflows in the form of a question-answer. By clicking a histogram in this case, it will pop open a new card. From that, I can easily interact and work with it. So, that was a quick overview of Insights. Now what we want to do is actually get into using it.
So let's explain the analysis tools a little bit more. So we want to show you how you can actually achieve all of these things, because a lot of the things are exactly, well, they are exactly what you have within GIS, but they're done sometimes in a slightly different way. So filtering, obviously one of the basic things we need to do with our data. So there are two different types of filter we can do, or two different places, I should say, where we can do them. We can either do the filtering on the data pane, or we can do filtering on a card. Now, there is a key difference between those two things. If you're doing it on your data pane, that is your data that you're working with, the entire data set, the layer, however you're used to calling it. If you filter from there on the data pane, everything you do downstream with that data set has that filtered data set, because you're doing it right at the start. If you want to filter something just in the way you're looking at it, then you would filter that on the card. So you can imagine with an example, if you have a very large data set and you just want to look at a subset of that and do your analysis with it, you'd be doing your filtering in the data pane. But if you want to compare a map from one year to the next year, then you're going to need to do that in the card, because if you did it on the data pane, then it's filtered everything that you ever do with that. So these are just, I mean, I say everything you do with that until you remove the filter. This isn't a permanent thing. So it's just so that you can understand the different places you can do it and the different effect that that has. So that's, in that case, obviously I'm talking about attribute filters. Obviously we can do spatial filters. So we can do that by selecting out by areas and by polygons. So again, this is using that interactivity. So if you want to select one particular area, you literally pick up the polygon from one card, drag it across to the other, and that will filter out that area. In terms of selections, very similar thing. We have attribute selections. So you would do your selection very much by using the interactivity. So everything within there interacts, so between the cards. So I might be selecting something on a table, and I would see that reflected on the map. I might be selecting something on the chart and see it on the map. Or I might be selecting from the legend. So the legend isn't something static, that's also something you can interact with. Whenever you do those selections, that will then fade everything else that you haven't selected out to the background and just make you see in the full color the ones that you are looking at. So that way, when you're doing the selections, you still have some sort of context of what the whole data looks like, but you're picking out the ones that you want to do. If you want to take that selection that you've already got and take it further downstream, you can once again click on those, that data set, drag it across to a new map, and that will create you a new result layer of that selected set of data that you have. So the other thing to mention is if you've been using 1.0 version of Insights, we have improved the selection enormously at 1.1. All that means is we're now up to what you'd expect within GIS. So you can do the selection, switch selection, select by box, select by lasso. So there's just lots of different ways of now doing the selection. So let's have a look at selections.
I get to do a demo. Yahoo!
Hold on to your hats.
Yes. This is not very often I get to do demos, but I'm going to try. So what you're looking at here is version 1.2 of Insights, which we just recently handed off to our release certification team. So we're on a very fast cadence with new releases of Insights. We'll talk about that in the roadmap section. This is the workbook page. This is the page that you come into and land where all of your workbooks and all the workbooks that are shared with you exist. So as I go over each one, I can do different things with them. I have options to delete, duplicate, or even share and change some settings. In this case, I just want to open up an existing workbook. So by opening it up, it automatically loads up all the data sets, all the maps, all the cards on all the different tabs, and shows them to me. What I'm working with here is some severe weather data across the US. And just to give you a sense of the amount of information, I'm working with about 56,000 tornado incidents across the USA. You can see that right here in this little area right there. Okay, so by flipping it back over, what I want to do is I only want to see the tornadoes that have injuries that are greater than 5. So I'm going to start with a really simple filter on the data pane, which will affect the data set as a whole. So by clicking on the data set filter, I want to change this filter to 5. And now what you see is a subset of that data automatically happening. And by the way, this is connecting to a server back in our corporate office in Redlands. So everything happening over the wire right now is live and real. So if I flip that back over, you'll see it's filtered down from 56,000 to only 2,400, just like that. All right, so now what I want to do is drag the injuries, the same one I just filtered, over to the map card. And by doing so, it's leveraging the ArcGIS platform and smart mapping to identify, based on this field, the best way to represent it. And since it's a measure, it's going to give me some graduated symbols. Now, if I flip the card back over again, you see that the statistics have changed. It's not just the total, but it's also giving me the min, the max, the sum, and the mean as well. So it's all dynamic on the fly, and it's happening. And it's giving me information as I go. Now what I want to do is drag two things. I want to drag the injuries and the states, and I want to bring that over to a summary table. So you can see as I drag things over, based on the information, it'll give me options to drop and create different things. So I just drop it on the table, and dynamically it's going behind the scenes and dynamically calculating the information based on what I gave it by the dimension I'm looking for. In this case, it's state. Okay? Now, what I want to do then is drag injuries. Let me go back down here again. I'm going to drag injuries over to a new map card. So you can definitely see that I have injuries on 2 map cards now. Let me pull this one down out of the way. So you can see I can freeform work with any of this information on the fly. And so what I want to do here is I want to sync to this map. There we go. So now everything is synced. What I want to do is take it to the next level. So filtering at the data set affects all downstream activity. So any result set is based on that filtered activity. But now I want to break it apart and branch off. So within this map card here, I want to filter it only at that map card on down. So I can again choose, let's select year this time. And I only want to select 2010 and apply that. Right off the bat, it only affects that one card and not the other. So you can see the different ways in which you can work with the data now pretty easily. And on this card, I'll go ahead and filter the same year field, only this time I'll select 2011. So now I can compare the 2 different years side by side. Good stuff so far, right? Okay, but now what if I wanted to actually select and work with stuff using selection as what Linda was pointing out? So let me close these cards out really quick and start over. So let me drag states from the tornadoes onto a map card. All right. Now what I want to do is, you'll see that by dragging state over there, it rendered it based on that value I was interested in. So I didn't have to stop, go to a renderer thing and change the renderer. What I had to do is just simply say, this is what I wanted to do, and Insights knew what to do. Again, intelligent defaults based on interrogating the data up front. Now, Insights is pretty cool in that everything about it is interactive. So even if I open up the legend and I look at Alabama, I can click on it and highlight Alabama. It becomes pretty straightforward. So what I can easily do then is start bouncing around. So now I'm looking at Arkansas, go back to Alabama, whatever it may be. So let me come back over here to my summary table. I want to see this using a column chart. Let me get rid of that selection set, come back over here. And because it's a summary table doesn't mean it can't be visualized a different way. So just by clicking one button at the top here, I want to see it as a column chart. So now you can see a column chart and a thing side by side. And if I use the box select, let me do that again. Yep, click on the box this time. Now I want to select those values out. Really simple. So off the bar chart, I can select the values. And I only want to work with those values. So going over to the map card, I can select those values, drag them away, and create another map card. And you can see now I'm working with a subset of that selection. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. I can take this a step further. How's about, whoops, it's not what I wanted. Let me go ahead and drag states on here. And what I want to do is only work with state of Texas. Another way of thinking about selections here. I see it, I touch it, I should be able to do something with it. So let me take that highlighted selection of Texas, move it up here, and drag it over the top. You see another option shows up, filter by the selected feature. So all I have to do is drop it. It asks me just to confirm the default values. I can change those if I want, or just click Run. So by doing nothing else, I now created a filter spatially for the state of Texas. Linda, back to you. Wait a minute, I did a good demo there.
Yeah,
Come on.
I was just going to say, you all now have living proof that Insights is so easy that your boss can use it. Okay, so the kind of cards that we can use. So we've kind of already introduced it. We have map cards, chart cards, and table cards, and we can change between any of those. So we're going to step through each one of those. I want to explain a little bit what default you expect to see, so that you know, as you drag the variables across, what you'll expect to see when you start to use Insights. The first thing I want to talk about is the map cards. So Insights is about allowing you to do analysis. Much of that's going to be exploratory analysis, trying to understand your data set. You may be extending that. It may be enough to give you all of your answers. But it's really about doing analysis, and as such, we're creating thematic maps. So because we're doing thematic mapping, we really want to keep the base maps as simple as you can. You don't want to be putting it on top of a topographic map. You might want to use that as a reference to see where you are, but when you're creating your thematic maps, it's really good practice to be using something like the light grey or the dark grey base maps. You can, of course, use your own base map. So you can put your own base map in there with whatever projection you want. That's when you're setting up your portal. You decide what base maps that Insights is going to use. In terms of the projections that we use, although the base maps we have by default are WGS 84, we're actually doing the analysis in the projection of your data. So we are adhering to the projection of the data. That's an important point. So the map might be lying a little bit, but your analysis is right. So that's the key thing, unless, of course, you've changed your base map to match the data at which you have it. So in terms of the defaults that you can expect, when we work with points and line data sets, we only actually give you a sort of a limited set of ways in which you can change how that looks. Again, this goes back to the idea that Insights is about doing analysis. It's not a cartographic project. It doesn't allow you to create beautiful maps. It does allow you to do your analysis and obviously change the way your data looks. That's part of doing the analysis. So when you bring in your data, and if you have some sort of special symbology that you've already changed it to, visualized it as, we will try and adhere to that. So I've not yet seen a case where we haven't managed to do it, but I'm sure there are some properties that will drop. But we try to honor the way in which you've actually got your data set already. In terms of what you can change it to, there are a number of different symbols, shapes that you can change it to, different colors. But as I say, it's not the full gamut of choices that you would expect within Pro or ArcMap. Exactly the same story goes for lines. We will try to honor what you have. There is some limited functionality to change the width, to change the color, but that's where it stops. I think we're going to introduce a little bit more at 2.0 at the next release. In terms of working with polygon data, our default is always going to be a proportional symbol. Now that's because if you're, obviously I should clarify, if you're using a numeric value, obviously if it's categorical, we're going to give it a unique color. But if it's a numerical value you're dragging across, you're going to get a proportional symbol because we don't know if that data is a total or not. Exactly the same if you're aggregating your data into areas, then obviously it is totals that you're getting back. So we know that we can't represent that as a choropleth. Because when you're viewing something as a choropleth, most times the areas at which you're seeing that are different sizes from one to another. In some cases, you're doing it to a grid, in which case you're all right, or hexagons. But most of the time, we're doing it to some kind of political boundary, census boundary, something like that. They're different sizes. So what that means is, depending on the size of the area, depending on the size of the polygon, that's dominating the map. And that's not what you want to do. So we want to take into account the differences of those sizes of areas when we're doing the choropleth map. So if you have something that is already a percentage or a rate, you can very easily change the type of data within the data pane. So you simply change it to a rate ratio as we have within there, and then that will automatically create a choropleth. That will then become the default for that data type. If you want to normalize your data, obviously you can still do that in the legend, and obviously you can do a calculate field. So there are those different options. So I just wanted to explain that so that you understand why it's always a proportional symbol and how you can default your data to being a choropleth. Okay?
My turn.
Your turn.
Here we go. All right, this is going to be a really simple demo. I'm going to switch over to a new tab using a different data set from Pittsburgh crimes. These are crimes from the city of Pittsburgh. Open source data. We're good to go. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to simply add a map card. But what I'm going to do, though, and I'm not sure how much data I'm working with, so let's take a quick look at that. Oh, only 35,000. All right, we're good. So I'm going to switch over to my Geographies tab. In ArcGIS, obviously the Living Atlas, we have standard administrative boundaries that are available for over 120 countries. We've made that available as part of ArcGIS 10.5. So what I want to do here is simply aggregate my crimes to block groups. So simply selecting the block group data, dropping it on, I can do a spatial aggregation. I'll just accept defaults for this demo. Should just take a second or two and come right back. There we go. Now all I want to do is go to my legend. This little guy right here that I just turned on and off is the legend. It tells you kind of what's going on. And you can see it's taking advantage of smart mapping technology of ArcGIS. I'm going to change this to counts and amounts. However, to Linda's point, to normalize it, I simply expand that out a little bit more, select the field I want to normalize or divide by, and now I have a proper choropleth map.
Brilliant. So, charts. The next thing that we have are chart cards. So again, I want to go through and explain what the defaults are and what you would expect as you drag across the different variables. So you can drag multiple variables as well. So that will become apparent as I talk through this. So bar charts are our default chart if you have a categorical variable. So if you drag anything that's a category across to a chart, that's what you should expect. If you drag a category and a numeric value, again, you're going to get a bar chart. Other ways of visualizing categorical data are using tree maps and using bubble charts. In terms of the types of data that you use, they're all exactly the same. They're different ways of visualizing that same data. So it's a categorical variable, and it's going to show you the amount or the count of that categorical variable. So you can imagine when I'm talking about if you drag across a number, you might want to drag across the total and the category. Same goes for the bubble charts, exactly the same. These are just different ways of seeing it. So a bar chart or a column chart is simply pivoting that data that you're seeing. The tree map is going to show you it by areas, so by cells. The bubble charts are going to show you it by size of proportional circles, and it's just going to be clustered together if you're talking about one numeric variable, and one categorical variable. You can extend it a little bit by having two numeric variables and one categorical variable. That will then look like a scatter plot, but then instead of just all being the same size points, they're going to change in size of the proportions. But by understanding that all of those are using categorical data and a numeric value, then you understand that you can flick easily between any of those visualizations, and of course the table, and of course the map. But there are other types of charts that you won't have the option to. It will be grayed out because it uses different types of data to create that type of chart. So a donut chart, again, does work on categories and will work on the number of that category, but it's a very different chart type. The point of a donut chart or a pie chart is that it represents the whole of your data. So if you're talking about percentages, you have to have 100% shown within your pie chart. It can't add up to 50%, or it can't add up to more than 100%. It's 100%. If you don't have the whole of whatever it is you're trying to show, don't use a donut chart. There are no strict rules. We allow you to do whatever you want in terms of the number of categories you drag across. But you can imagine if you have a whole load of different small slivers, all your labels are going to overlap. Nobody will be able to read anything. So as a rule, I would recommend don't use them with less than 3 categories and don't use them with more than 8 categories. But that said, we've not restricted it because you know your data better than we do. There may be a very good reason why you want to show it. It may be that the small ones you can't read are insignificant or whatever it is. So there is enough there for you to use it in your way, but use these things with caution. Histograms, again, a very different type of chart. So histograms are just numeric variables. So if you drag across a numeric variable, the only type of chart you're going to get the option to see is a histogram. So a histogram, what we're doing is binning your numeric values. We're putting them into different classes. So it's equivalently like a choropleth map in that sense. We're putting it into the different bins. So what you can see from a histogram is the distribution of your data. So you'll be able to see whether you have lots of low values or lots of high values. And importantly, for a lot of sort of more complex analysis, you'll be able to understand, is your data normally distributed? So are you seeing a bell shape within that histogram of that data? So that's a unique type of chart, but has very good uses. Scatter plots, again, something completely different, very valuable if you want to understand relationships between 2 numeric variables. So you want to see, does income increase with education? Would you expect them to go up in exactly the same rate? If they do, then they're showing a nice linear relationship. Now we have statistics that you can add on top of this scatter plot. So you can add on, for example, the linear line if you expect it to go up in an exact linear way. As one increases by the value of 10, the other one increases by the value of 10. If you think it's an exponential relationship, we have an exponential line. So we add on those statistics onto the chart, which is a simple click that again allows you to interpret that chart a little bit more to understand what it's telling you. The last type of chart we have is a time series or a line graph. So this is showing something that's continuous. So it's joining all of the things together, which is really why it's most often used for things over time. But you can switch your data to a line graph. You may have a good reason to do that. And another thing that you can do with the line graph is you can create a combination graph. So if you create a column graph and then you drag something on top of it that has exactly the same x-axis, then we will create the 2 graphs together. So then you can picture those 2 pieces of information essentially on 2 different charts, but together, so you can look at that information together. So that's charts. And now I'm going to move on to the table cards. So this is the third type of card we have: map cards, chart cards, table cards. So these tables are what we call summary tables, which are exactly the same as a pivot table. That's what we're doing. We're summing up, or we're counting, or we're finding the average of whatever category you've dragged across. This is done dynamically in the background. So as you drag your category across, if you just drag a single category, it will immediately give you the count of each one of those different categories within that field. If you drag across a numeric variable with that, it will give you the sum by each one of those categories. And you can change the statistics to minimum, maximum, and mean, and sum. You can have one category and any number of numeric categories you want. It will keep expanding. At the moment, it's only one category. That's something we want to extend as we go forward so that you can have two categories, essentially grouping your data by another variable. So one important thing to remember about these tables is, as I'm saying that it's pivoting the data, that's essentially managing your data. If you want to see something by a different category in which you have your data, you don't have to take the data out to Excel or, do a pivot table and it never seems to work for some reason or another. It's just going to do it dynamically. And then you can go into the create relationships and do a join back to the other data as long as it has something in common. So that's one, it's a slightly different way of thinking, but something we very commonly do in GIS. Okay, do you want to show
Sure.
these?
I can do this.
You're on a roll.
All right, let's see what I can do. All right, so I'm going to switch over now to a set of water data. And this water data has work orders for leaks, and I'm going to add an additional data set in here for service orders. Let's see. All right, service requests leaks. So I'm going to simply add that. So now I have two different data sets I'm working with. So let's go ahead and start by opening up the service request leaks and dragging initiated by to a table. Now you'll see here that, let me bring this up and expand it out just a little bit so you can see it. You can see that the table automatically takes the dimension and counts all the values associated with that dimension and gives you the total count there. And of course, I can sort this any which way I want. So I'm going to do the same thing, only this time I'm going to drop the priority to this summary table. So by default, it'll change the count to match the dimension I just dropped. In other words, I'm now interested in priority. I'm no longer interested by who initiated the service request. It'll dynamically adjust as I go. All right. So what I want to do now, though, is I want to generate, and then switch over to a different table. I have in this data set estimated leak rate and estimated leak duration. I want to create a quick calculated field. So I'm going to open up the attribute table. This is the full-on attribute table in which I can create a new field. So I'm going to go ahead and name this guy loss. And I'm going to select the leak rate and multiply that by the leak duration. Cool. It checked it. It's valid. I'm going to go ahead and run it. So now it just created a new field for me to work with. Great. So now if I come back over here, let me get rid of this table, get rid of this, create some space. Let me go ahead and drag that loss column and drop it onto a table card. And you'll see that it automatically summed it up. So if I look at that water loss by priority, get rid of that. Water loss and priority on a table card. Now it's actually showing me by priority the amount of loss I'm seeing per prioritized service request. And of course, if I change that from a total amount to an average amount, that gives me a different perspective. And if I sort this guy, whoa, wait a minute, priority 2 is actually leaking a hell of a lot more than priority 1. But look at priority 3 calls. So it kind of gives you a different perspective simply by looking at that. Now, all the while I've been doing that, it's creating these things called result layers. These are temporary data sets that are the result of your analytic operations that you can then take and do other things with. And I'll stop right there with that and turn it back over.
Okay, so let's just quickly summarize that. So we've talked about the tables we had before, the card tables, but let's be clear, you also still have your attribute table. So just the same as you'd expect within GIS, you can get to that attribute table. That's where you can do your field calculations. We already have a lot of functions in there. So that you understand a little bit about what's going on in the background, it appears that we are just seeing that, we're adding that to the table. The reality is actually a join that's going on in the background. We are not changing your data. So that's particularly important when we say that we're working against your database. We're a read-only, so we're not affecting that. It appears to the user as if it's one big data set, but it's not, so it's a join. We're doing the calculation for the full table, and one neat little trick that so many people don't notice is anything that you have in that attribute table, you can drag that field out. So you can stick that on a table, a chart, or a map. I just think that's kind of cool, so I always mention it. Result layers, you've already mentioned. So these are temporary result layers that we create. This is about exploring your data, understanding the data, seeing what you can get out of what you have. We don't want to fill up your files with all of these, final one, final two, final. We all do that. So we just create these temporary ones, and when you have the real final, of course you can export that. You can share that back out to your portal, then it creates the feature service, and you actually have the permanent layer that you or anyone else can work with, depending on how you choose to share it. So, yes, we create the result layers depending on whether it's actually changed the data. So the good example of when it won't create a result layer is a histogram. We're not doing anything except just binning that data, so there's going to be no result layer for that. Anything else, so a bar chart, yes, we're going to create the result layer. So remember that we're actually creating whole new data sets. If you want to then use that again, you can.
Before you go on, I'd really like to show something more.
Okay.
So I got one more demo in me.
Oh, yeah, showing off now.
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, I learned.
Oh, yeah, you learned from the best.
So what I want to do is go back to the crime data and use that result layer in an analysis operation. It's, again, a new data set that was created as a result of an aggregation. So in here, I have the total count of crimes. I also have this population thing. So again, just going to the data table, let me go ahead and create a new field, and I'll call it population density. Whoops, not there. Here. Thank you. All right, now I have a new field. And all I want to do is divide the count of crimes by the population. It checked. Let me run it. All right. So now what I want to do is change that value from a measure or a number to a rate and ratio. This kind of combines a number of different things here. Great. What can I do with that?
Anything that you can do with a numeric variable.
Including creating
a
chloropleth map.
Default.
Different way of doing it, but now we're using a transient data set or a result layer to generate new information for me on the fly. So there's all kinds of permutations and ways in which you can work with all of this information that you're already generating without messing with the storage of your system, but instead taking advantage of what you've done.
Okay, a crucial part of the story, sharing all this wonderful analysis you've done. You've spent hours poring over this, or hopefully minutes in Insights. So you've done your analysis, you now want to share it. So we can obviously share our workbooks, we can save them. We can share the pages. So when you've finished your page, you can share that out. People will be able to have all the interactivity. So when you see we're clicking on one thing and it's selecting, highlighting something else, they will have all of that functionality. They are not able to do any analysis of that data. So they're not able to mess with it in any way, but they're able to explore the data. When you share that page, we also create an iframe, which means you can embed that page straight into a story map or into your own website if you're happy to share out your data, so then you can share any of the results you've done openly. We've already talked about how you can share the layers, so just share them out as feature layers, and we've mentioned the story maps. Over to you.
I get to talk again.
Yeah.
All right.
Come on, windbag.
Yes. The roadmap is kind of important. It's important for not only us in planning and relating information back to our our leadership teams, but also important for you to know what's coming so you can better plan for what it is you need. Also, it helps you understand what it is we're doing so that if we're not doing what you want, getting your input and your feedback is going to be critical. So obviously we released 1.0 with 10.5, and that was back in December of 2016. We quickly turned around a 1.1 release, not because we had to because of a problem, but because we wanted to introduce a new cadence of releases for Insights to deliver more functionality, more capability, more quality, more performance, all of those things in 6 to 8 week release cycles. So you can look for a new release coming every couple of months. So we quickly released 1.1 at the end of January. We started immediately from there working on a 1.2. We just turned it over before the Developer Summit to our release certification team to make it available for download. So we're now done with 1.2. So you can start seeing all the input that we're gathering from our users that are using Insights or starting to try Insights. It's coming in readily, fast, and we're prioritizing based on a lot of different variables. So 1.2 is now done. It's off, which means we're starting on 2.0. Our 2.0 will be released in sync with 10.5.1 release, which is targeted, I believe, at our user conference this year, our summertime release. In that release, we're doing a number of different things. We're adding more capabilities, such as new visualizations to support link analysis, chord diagrams, force direct graphs, data clocks. We're adding more statistical operations, both spatial and non-spatial statistics. We're adding, just a wealth of stuff, just a bunch of stuff, you know.
When are we going to tell the team?
No, they kind of know.
They know.
Yeah, we're adding support for Oracle native direct connect to Oracle. We're adding support for PostgreSQL as well. So we're extending and continuing to evolve. Which brings me to that last statement right there. The roadmap is not scheduled more than 2 releases out, with the only thing that's firm and scoped in is the current release that we're working on. Everything that we're doing is based on an agile pattern, something we're calling internally asynchronous scrums. It's kind of a different way of thinking, leveraging the concept of work streams. Either way, we're intending to be agile. We're listening. We're continuing to learn. We want your feedback, not just the good stuff, not just what you think you really want to have in Insights, but also the negative stuff, the bad and the ugly. We want to make this great, and so we are open and listening constantly. With that, that's really all that we had for this short amount of time that we have with you in this workshop. We do have some time for Q&A if there are any.
Can't see anything.
Okay.
Yes.
We do have one. Cool. Separate install. So I think the question was about installation. Right. So although it's part of ArcGIS, it is a separate install that you lay down on top of ArcGIS Enterprise. Okay. So it is a separate installer. So if you have an enterprise deployment, you don't have to worry about updating it or upgrading it. We just lay bits on top. Basically, we drop jar files and web files into it. Okay? Good question. Sir?
Yeah, you talked about volume of data. How much data can we throw at Insights? If you're doing a lot in memory here, you're doing 6,000 records for point data. Can you talk to us a little bit about some testing you've done with volume?
Right. So the question is on volume of data. And if I can switch back over here. Let's see, I've got some geographies here. Let's show the counties of the US. Drop that in here. You can start seeing it just come right on in. So yes, we are working with polygons, lines, and points, but in fact, the performance is dependent on your configuration, on your system, on what you're doing at the time, the type of data you're working with. Obviously, complex polygons are going to be a little slower than moderate or even generalized polygons. Working with columns that are 90 columns wide, millions of records deep, that depends on your database engine. Are you working with a SAP HANA database where everything's running in memory? Are you working with SQL Server where it's just a SQL database and it's on commodity hardware? Performance is going to be based on your weakest link. Unfortunately, there's no magic bullet. We are optimized to work with large amounts of information. Our average record size that we test with is 250,000 records, minimum. That's what we test with. We actually have a demo. We actually had to scale it back for the plenary because they cut our time back. 1 million records of 311 data from New York City, and that's what we were working with. They asked us to cut it back because we only had 4 minutes this morning. But we do have data sets that we pull in. We just had a, just to emphasize the performance and insights, we don't suck the data into the computation. We send the computation to the data. In regards to relational data sets, we do that in a form of SQL. So we actually write a bunch of SQL and we send it down to the database. Our hosted data store is a simple feature geodatabase. So we've worked with the geodatabase team to enhance the capabilities of the ST type to support the types of analysis that we need inside of Insights. Obviously, if you're working with SQL Server and it doesn't have a ST type in there from Esri, we're going to be limited by the capabilities of SQL Server, but our new engine that we added to ArcGIS at 10.5, known as the Analytic Data Service, is designed to write SQL that's specific to accept the capabilities of SQL Server or SAP HANA or Teradata or whatever that is. So we're sending dialect-specific SQL down to those data sources. So again, performance is going to be based on what you're doing, your hardware configuration, how you plan things out, and how your data is set up as well. Another thing to consider, if your disk is running on, if your database is running on commodity hardware, and it's an old 5400 RPM spin disk, well, it's going to be as fast as we can suck data out of that to let the database engine work. So for us, working with a large amount of information is important. This is analysis. This isn't just putting dots on a map. This is about analysis, spatial analysis at that. So we're going to try to do the best that we can with that information. But there is no magic bullet. It's got to be done right up front. Make sense? Did I answer your question?
So I can show you the point data set that we were just talking about there. So this is 1 million records that I'm just going to bring in. There you go. So that's it rendered now. So yeah, I mean, because it's the caveat that points are obviously a lot quicker than complex polygons, obviously, but you can see how quickly that comes in and how quickly that will render. Okay, so this data set I downloaded from New York City Open Data. I loaded it into, I think it was Pro I put it into, and then I shared it as a feature layer. I did nothing to it. So there is still messy stuff in there. There's descriptions, there's horrible fields in there, and it handled it perfectly. That's right, I put it as a feature layer, but I could have put it into a database, yeah. That was just my choice to do it as a feature layer. That's what this is. Yep.
Yeah, we could have easily brought that into a SQL Server table. It just has XY coordinates, added a geometry column to that. Geo-enabled it based on the XY coordinates and then did SQL against that and rendered it. The visualization is going to render it to the capacity of the browser. We are using low-level canvas calls here. So this is not your traditional app. This is an Angular 2-based app using TypeScript underneath. And we do use low-level canvas to render the information that we have. But the data itself was a simple download from the open data site, 1.1 million records, I think.
Yeah.
And then we simply brought it into ArcGIS as a feature layer, hosted feature layer using the relational data store of ArcGIS. Easily done inside a SQL Server if you wanted. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're looking to do, because this is what our research has shown us with data analysts in the field. Not just what we can do behind the Esri walls, but we went out to the field and talked to a bunch of people. So yeah, it's very important. It's a very good question, and thank you for bringing it up. Sir?
Special licensing to share things public. Talk about the licensing requirements.
Okay, so the question is licensing requirements for sharing things publicly. Today, Insights does require a named user in order to work with it. It's an on-prem scenario, so it's working with your software. If you have it exposed publicly, we adhere to the portal sharing model. So if you're willing to share your data publicly, you can share Insights pages publicly through a shared model. You actually have that on.
Yeah, so I've just got the shared page up here. So this view, the shared page, That's going to be something that someone who actually has an organization, a named account, they don't have to be an Insights license, but they have to have a named account to see this. However, the iframe is something that you can embed wherever you want. That can be public. The only caveat on that is you have to share your data. But as long as you're happy to open your data, the iframe allows you to share the results openly.
So, answer your question? Great, thank you. Let's jump back right over here, this gentleman. So the question comes down to connections to different data sources, such as REST databases. I'm thinking Salesforce CRM, SharePoint Online, the like. Yes, there are lots of plans to connect to a myriad of sources. We're just getting started. With Insights, we've taken the approach of crawl, walk, and run. In other words, we're not going to boil the ocean. We started with a simple premise. 80% of the world uses 20% of the functionality. Let's start with that. Let's start with the most common data sources. There's some strategy in there as well, but let's start with some common data sources, but then let's evolve it. And let's evolve it over a period of releases and phase it in. But we're never going to try to boil the ocean with this. Think about it. ArcGIS has well over 1,000 geoprocessing capabilities built into it. Could you imagine trying to do all of that in this kind of an experience all at once? Not going to happen. So we started with the most common, the most familiar, the things that will get you off the ground and running. And that's where we started. And we're going to continue evolving that based on workflow-driven approaches. Link analysis is a workflow. Regression analysis is another workflow. We're going to continue evolving based on that. That help? So yes, and supporting REST-based databases. Yes, I want to connect to a Salesforce database, work with a report object that you've already created, pull that in and start doing something, point and click, just like anything else, and then enable the same kind of analysis against that report object as I'm doing with SQL Server or hosted layers. Right there. I'm sorry.
As you share it.
Representation. So this is about presentation of the shared page. Today, thank you. So today, access to the presentation is minimal. Basically, however you laid it out is what you'll get. In terms of adding additional capabilities, we're currently collecting information as to what people want, and then we'll be exposing that over time. So in terms of adding titles, grids, gradicules, stuff like that, we're working towards it. But nothing stops you from adding this all to story maps and letting story maps be all year round. So that's where we started. We suggested that story maps is the way to present your information, and we'll evolve that over time with more reporting capabilities, including the ability to add filters, specific date ranges that you can focus on, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Sir.
So in all the demos that you've shown, you're using feature layers. Are there any limitations if you had mixed sources? So you've got a feature layer for stores and you've got some transactional data coming out of the database and adding those features. What is the limit?
Okay, so the question is on limitations of the data sources from which we bring into Insights. And yes, there are some, right? Obviously, within a GIS system, we can do anything GIS. But in a transactional system such as SQL Server, in the relational sense, well, we're limited by the analytic capabilities of that in some regard, in terms of fast, right? We want to send the SQL down and allow it to execute in the database engine itself. I have 28 million records. I want to aggregate up total sales by country. I only want 3 records back. But in some cases, you can't do an operation. So in that case, we use traditional geoprocessing tools, and then we work with the data a lot of times in computation. So we bring the data to the computation. So it depends on the type of analysis, but in general, we try to abstract away the concept of data sources so you can focus on the analysis, and we'll leverage the correct tool to do that behind the scenes. So that's the core concept. Abstraction, work with your different data, but work with it as efficiently and as effectively as possible based on the type of analysis that you want to perform. So we're trying to be smart about it. but we also understand that GIS there's a lot of spatial to it, right? So we want to be able to take advantage of as much of that as we could. That help? Sir? The question is on scaling. Okay, so scaling, now we're back to ArcGIS Enterprise. So we work with ArcGIS Enterprise, and scaling ArcGIS Enterprise is well documented and well understood. It's been around for quite a while now. So I can scale across a distributed system where portals on one machine, servers are on 5 machines, data stores on one massive machine. So I can scale out, I can scale up. So depending on the type of analysis, the number of users, the type of data that you're working with, sizing estimations and planning on hardware configurations should be done upfront, even before you think about Insights installations, but with ArcGIS Enterprise installations. Those are some critical pieces to the puzzle. So understanding sizing, estimation, and hardware configuration based on what type of data you want to do, the type of analysis you're performing, and the number of users that will be hitting it simultaneously. Both people working the analysis through a workbook, creating, editing workbook through analysis, or viewing those interactive reports on the fly. So all of that has to come in. Again, proper planning up front helps you in the long run with performance, scalability, and what users will be happy with. Okay.
Can you show again the relational panel?
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
it's very interesting. And can you show it during the...
Oh, the relational data, the relational panel, creating relationships.
So the create relationships here. So these are 2 tables or 2 data sets I brought in from SQL Server. So one of them has a few locations, but then we have water consumption from a lot of people. So obviously that would be one to be stored in a flat table. So the first thing it's going to do is pick out the first column in common, but obviously you can change that. So I can change it there. You can have multiple fields that you want to join on, and you also have the different types of join. So if you want to do an inner or an outer join, we have all of that there. And that will obviously create a new result layer. In this case, it's taken something that was non-spatial, joined it to something spatial, and created the spatial data set there.
Good. Yeah, keep in mind the relationship view is not materializing the view in the database. So it's creating a view on the fly specifically for your workbook. It's added as a convenience to the data analyst, the spatial analyst that wants to perform work but doesn't want to stop, get out, do something, or make a request before he can actually proceed. So it's, again, more convenience, and we're trying to add as much convenience to Insights as possible. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed it.